This is from The Dragon's Bride, which is one of my favorite stories from the Serpent Bride, and it's from the middle of the story. A week after Ragnar had gone, Signy went to the harp and touched its strings. Outside, the rain was falling again, no more than a heavy mist in a windless calm, a storm that had spent itself. Tomorrow it would probably be clear. The sun would shine. The geese would splash in puddles. The pigs would frolic and squeal. The swallows would swoop through the yard and seem to be chasing their own reflections. On such a day as tomorrow might be, would not Ragnar return? Why should he? Signy played a melody she remembered from her childhood in a different, happier forest before this hall was ever built. It might have been a lullaby. She played it for Ragnar. It comforted her. "That old tune," said her mother. "Your father's mother sang that dreadful thing over and over in her dotage. For pity's sake, choose something else if you must moon over music." The dogs barked, then came yipping and whining at the door. "Go away," ordered her brother, and there was a scurrying and splashing as though they had all fled at his voice, too panicked to avoid puddles. Something pushed the hall door open and slid inside. Signy's mother screamed, hurled the earthenware cup she held, and scampered up the stairs to the high loft, nimbly as a child. The sisters-in-law fled after her, and the nieces and nephews with them, scrabbling over one another in their haste, everyone shrieking. Like the pigs racing to a trough of skim milk, thought Signy, but then she saw the thing that had come in the door, and her hands froze on the strings. Her brothers were on their feet. Some reached for axes, some for swords, but none actually moved to oppose it as it twisted its way into the hall. She had always thought dragons would be larger. This was quite large enough for their hall, not even so big as a horse, not quite, and more slender. Its long neck and even longer tail nevertheless made its length 2 or 3 times a horse's. The tail lashed with a life of its own, knocking a bench into the fire that roared up into brilliance over the dry wood, gilding the creature's raven-black scales. Not so ugly as she had always thought dragons would be, either. One of her brothers raised his axe, and Signy made a small noise, because the dragon was such a beautiful, alive thing, and had not actually threatened them yet. It swung its head like a hammer, and the brother went flying backwards into another. Both fell against the stairs and scrambled up them. "The rest of you too," said the dragon. "Up or out, doesn't matter. Go." A third brother dropped his sword and crept for the stairs on tiptoe. The dragon sat up on its haunches and looked at the remaining 4, huddled indecisive against the wall. "Out!" it roared, and it unfurled wings that reached from one wall to the other and darkened even the fire in their shadow. The 4 men fled into the night, splashing through the puddles in the wake of the dogs. Signy sat still at the harp. She wanted to flee, but if she stood, her knees would fail her, she knew. The dragon was looking towards her. It picked its way through the disorder of the hall, as sure-footed and precise as fox or ermine, as powerful and graceful as horse or stag. Not a lumbering, uncouth muddle of creatures, but an animal very certain of itself and all its parts, which made it that much more real and that much more fearful. Signy wrapped her shaking hands in her skirt and looked down at her lap so as not to see the dragon. Like a baby rabbit, she thought, but it never works for the baby rabbit. The fox eats it anyhow. "Signy," said the dragon, and she looked up. Its eyes were fire, gold shadowed with bronze. "Will you come away with me, Signy?" it asked. Signy stared. She said, "With you?" "Yes," it said. "Will you give me your love, Signy?" Signy found she had stood up after all, and her knees had not failed her. She was standing behind the harp with her hands wound in her shawl, and when the dragon put its forefeet on the stool she had left, she backed still further away. "I cannot," she said. "Really, I can't." Because Ragnar might return. She had to believe Ragnar might return, and even if he did not, what was this love she had thought awoken in her worth, if she could transfer it to another creature for the asking? Although a dragon might be better company than— "No," she said again. "Oh, no." "I would make you a queen, Signy," the dragon said. Queen of the mud and the swine she had been for Ragnar, and they had laughed in the storm. "I can't," she said. The dragon shut its eyes and folded in on itself until it seemed only a dark snarl of shadows waiting to be swept from the floor. Signy took a step towards it. "I'm sorry," she said. The dragon opened its eyes into startling light again. "A kiss, then," it said. "One kiss, Signy?" Signy put a fist to her mouth. "Oh," she said, and drew a deep breath. "A kiss. I suppose. Very well." She stood very straight and stiff, hands clenched in her skirt and shaking, as the dragon reared up and clasped her with its hard forelimbs, wrapping them about her, holding her close. It was not cold and slimy as she had expected, not like a fish at all, but warm, hot even, its muzzle smooth, scales sliding and hissing like silk as it brushed over her cheek. Its breath was hot and dry. Its scent was of clean ashes. Not so terrible as she thought, and she dared to open her eyes and touch her lips to the side of its horn-plated head. "There," she said, and her voice shook only a little as she looked down and saw the black claws, dagger-sharp, that curved around her arms. She looked up again into the molten eyes, and remembered eyes of that colour, that luminance, somewhere.